We're here with legendary NASCAR driver Marvin Panch, who's here at the Lionel warehouse to sign 500 of his 1965 Ford Galaxie that he drove with the Wood brothers. You drove that for a couple years, as you mentioned. Can you tell us about the 1965 Atlanta 500, in which you were actually, I think you had to leave the race early, but you were still credited with the win?
Well, what happened, I hate to say this because I'll tell you why when I get through telling you this. I was leading the race at Atlanta, and that's before we had radios and that, and they held up the pit board that Freddie Lorenzen was gaining on me. So I started moving on a little faster because that car, Wood Brothers car, was real quick. And the slower cars that I was lapping were all over running down the speedway, down the backstretch over to the wall. And I'm running down under here passing them all. And what happened was, a real close, good friend of mine, J.T. Putney, was in the race. And he seen me coming, he was leading that pack. And he seen me coming, and he was trying to do me a favor and get out of my way. Or if he would have stayed where he was out of my way. So, but he did, he pulled down to the left, which I wasn't expecting him to do, and my left front caught his right rear, and it sent him down in a gravel pit. And Atlanta used to have a kind of a gravel pit between the third and fourth turn, and I thought, oh my gosh, I thought I killed him. I really did. He took a nasty ride down there, and evidently, Bill France had some money involved in his car, and he hollers down from up in the tower. He says, "Get him out of that car, get him out of that car." And it was getting near the end of the race. So when I pulled in, A.J. Foyt was there. So they put A.J. in it. He ended up finishing the race. And I got credit for it because I started the race. And I ran all of it except a few laps near the end until I got kicked out. So that's the story of the Atlanta race. And luckily, Putt was okay. He came out of it real good. That really worried me because we were real close.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear he was okay. Well, you had 17 wins in the NASCAR Sprint Cup Series, and one of them was in the 1961 Daytona 500. Can you tell us about that victory?
Well, I drove at that time was for Smokey Unic. Fireball Roberts was his original driver, which was the 22 Pontiac, number 22, and he campaigned at 60 Pontiac in the year of 60. Well, came Daytona time, and they were building him a new car, and the old car was sitting in the shop, bent up down the right side where Fireball bounced it off the walls or something, and the mechanics working on the new car said, "Smoke, why don't we run that old car?" And he said, "Nah, it's too wide, too bulky, too heavy. It won't run with them." And they said, "Well, we think it will." Well, he said, "If you think that much of it, take it outside the shop and work on it. I'll furnish all the parts and pieces for it, but you guys are on your own time." And they did that. Well, that was fine. They put it all together. So then they asked Fireball, who should we put in it? And Fireball said, "Well, I've been running with Panch all the time, but why not put him in?" So they changed the number from 22 to 20 on this Pontiac, and went out, and we were running. At that time, they had 100-mile races before the big race, and Fireball and I hooked up together, and we ran away and hid from the field, and came in, and Smokey came over to me and pointed his finger at me. He says, "I don't want you doing that during the race." I said, "Smoke, we can hook up and leave the field, you know." He said, "If something happens to Fireball, I don't want something to happen to you. I don't want you in it." So at the start of the race, I had to work my way back. I was running about a half a lap back. And they hung up a sign, Fireball, near the end of the race. And Fireball blew up, or something happened to his car. So they gave me the sign to go. And the Pontiac had the field loaded with 61s. They had a bunch of all the top drivers in 61 Pontiacs because they definitely wanted it to win. So, but they forgot that Smokey's engines, they were pretty strong. So I ended up winning the race. So Pontiac wasn't real happy about that, but they were happy that was the first Pontiac to win Daytona. Then after the race, I had a 40% deal to drive for Smokey, and he came up to me, he said, anybody good enough to win the race here? He says, worth 50% to me. I've never had that happen before.
Right.
And then he took the other 50% and gave it to the mechanics for working on it. He didn't take any credit for having that car in there.
Wow.
So that was a real neat deal. That's the story on my 61 Daytona win.
Oh, very cool. Well, for those of you who are just joining us, we're here with Marvin Panch at the Lionel Racing headquarters. We're in the warehouse, and actually Marvin Panch has joined us here today because he's going to be signing 500 of these number 21 1968 Ford Galaxies. That are available through Lionel, and they're made by University Racing, a great partner of Lionel Racing. And you've talked to us a little bit about some of the wins that you've had. Can you tell us what first got you interested in the sport of NASCAR and the sport of stock car racing?
Well, actually, it goes back a long ways. I'm an antique. I was living in California, and I was with the brake and wheel alignment shop, and we used to go to the races at the Oakland Wall, and they had a quarter-mile track inside of the big track, and went in there to watch the races on weekends. And there was a driver there by the name of Lloyd Reagan who was running a six-cylinder against the V8s, and he was pretty consistent on winning. So they announced they were going to have a stock car race there at the big track. So I went down after the race and said, Lloyd, how'd you like to drive my car in a stock car race? And he said, what have you got? And I said, well, I've got a 50 Mercury out here, which I was driving on the street. And he said, yeah. I said, I'll run it for you. And he did that. And he ran real good, really good. So then they also were going to start not a modified, kind of clunker junker races, you know, all the junkyard. And so I said, I'll build one of those if you would drive it for me. He said, well, okay. So he showed up the first Saturday night to drive it, and he ended up winning the race, but the guy behind him spun him.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, you going to be here next week? And he said, I don't know. He said, these guys really don't know how to drive. He says, they run over you. So sure enough, he didn't show up, and I got in the car myself the following week, and I thought I was a pretty good driver on the street. I thought, I can handle this. Well, they passed me on both sides and scared the daylights out of me. So that's how I started driving, and then the lady in charge of the Racing Association up there said, drive your own 50 Mercury now. We got a big race coming up Bay Meadows. Go ahead and run your own car. She said, why give you driver a percentage when you can do it yourself? And I started driving myself, and ended up, we started winning a bunch of races built out there. So that worked out. Dick Myers, driver by the name of Dick Myers, and I, we both had 50 Mercuries, and we were winning most of the races. And then we went to the Dodges in 53, and came back to Darlington in 53. And everything just, we're offered good rides and that. So I stayed back here, and one of the best deals I ever had was getting with the Wood Brothers. They were probably the most honest fellows you could actually drive for. It started out, the first time I drove for them, in Atlanta, and I fell out with the car that I had, and whoever was driving the Ford says, he was having a vibration problem. So Glenn Wood came running over to me. He said, how about jumping in for me? Because the driver was a little unhappy, or he told me. And heck, that was the best driving car I ever drove. There wasn't any vibration. So after the race, we used to have to stand at the NASCAR window to get paid. They paid the drivers, and then you settle with the car owners, and then you go home. Well, scoring was messed up a little bit. So we stood there a long time trying to get paid off, and we got settled up, and about a week or so later, I get a letter through the mail from Glenn with a check in it for $50. No explanation. So the next race, I said, Glenn, what in the world was that $50 for? He says, "No boy, give me $100 to put a decal on my back quarter window there." He said, "I figured you're entitled to half of it." So that's how honest they are.
That's awesome.
So my relationship with the 21 car and Wood Brothers is second to none. It was first class.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, two more questions I have for you. One is, when you were first starting in stock car racing, were there any drivers that you looked up to?
Well, this Dick Myers I mentioned, he was one of the top ones, and but this going back a long ways. So I didn't actually go around looking up to anybody, trying to figure out how to win a race.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, last question, then I'll let you go sign all those beautiful Ford Galaxies. You mentioned that you follow the sport a little bit today. Who's your prediction or your pick to win the 2015 NASCAR Sprint Cup Series Championship?
Well, the answer to that's almost impossible. Who in the world can tell? Of course, it could be Busch, because the way he ran after he had his leg broke and came back to get himself into the runoff, the championship. And Harvick is about as tough as they come right now. So it's wide open. You can't predict who's going to do it. I tell you who's going to win it. It's the one that doesn't have any bad luck during the next races. It runs steady, and so you ask me a question I can't answer.
Fair enough. Well, thank you a lot, and I hope you have a good time signing all these 500 limited edition 1965 Ford Galaxies. Thanks a lot.
I'm looking forward to it. I don't know if my wrist is or not.
Well, we'll be out there to take some pictures and maybe show video or two of you signing some. So we'll see you then.
Very good, John. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.